We've had a situation in the Blues Stormers games where the Blues decided not to defend the Stormers forming a maul, and so there was a bit of a nothing. Explain what we're allowed to do there, because I thought if one team formed one side of a maul, you had to sort of join in, but not true.
No, so yeah, and I guess you'll never find reference to that term "nothing" in the law book either. But it's one of those things that we often sort of talk about, that that there's nothing formed at that particular time. If you've got 4 or 5 players from one team formed with the ball, there's still in law nothing happened at that stage until the opposition commit. So if we defining what a maul is the ball carrier plus one player from either team to form a maul. So if you've only got the players from one team, no maul has been formed at that point, and you almost get to that standoff type situation. So the team with the ball have to be very careful, because immediately that they shuffle the ball back through those players, it's deemed to be an accidental offside type situation. But
it's almost an abstraction, isn't it, in that case?
It had been deemed as that in the past, and it's one of those things where the other team needs to have basically the opportunity to get straight at the ball carrier without impediment, pretty much.
What Shibura in that case allowed was the ball went to the back of the maul, and the Auckland players just came round and tackled the guy at the back. And he said that even though they came in from the side, but they're coming in from the side of nothing. So technically, because there's nothing formed, there's no offside lines at that particular point in time, and therefore they can get away with it. I think this will become a common strategy, because if you're a weak mauling team, or even if you don't want to maul from your line, standing off is your best. They can do nothing but move the ball.
And that definitely is a way to defend that if you don't want to get into that contact, because once the maul has happened, if that other team's gaining the momentum, there's often not a lot you can legally do to stop that.
Now, if they keep the ball at the front of this non-existent maul, you've almost got a wedge, haven't you, situation, which I think is frowned upon.
Yeah, it is, but at that time too, if the other team then choose to commit, then it would be treated as a maul, basically as long as that ball carrier had stayed at the front, and that sort of, there's a talk in the law about the flying wedge and things like that as well, so we've just got to be careful that ball stays at the front.
So if the ball stays at the front and there's 7 guys around the ball carrier and they start to move forward, that is a wedge, isn't it?
So they need to be behind him and doing that. And I guess as that moves forward, naturally you would get that contact from the other team anyway, possibly. But it does become quite a tricky situation.
We'll be talking about this again sometime, because it's something new that the teams strategically are going to see if they can get some advantage from.
And often, you get a situation like that where it just doesn't look right. The picture isn't right about how you see a classic maul form and things like that. And hopefully the players are effective in dealing with when they either do or don't join that, but also that the team with the ball know their obligations and get the ball out of there in a clean fashion.
All right, we'll look at the space. You're obviously looking to get the space available at the set pieces to allow the attacking situation to develop. That's nothing new about that.
No, and I think that's one of the things that ultimately, the further apart the two teams are, everyone would agree, the better the play is. So it gives the backs the freedom to play as they like, or the forwards are running up, they've got space to run into. From a refereeing point of view, if we don't have to worry about the offside lines, if we know that the players are back and where they should be, that's one less thing, and we can focus on what's happening around the ball and things a bit better as well. So in a perfect world, every time at a scrum we'd have the backs at least the 5 metres back, the line-outs would be 10 metres back, and generally the players are pretty good at that time of getting back. It's often around that ruck and maul time where the offside lines are moving and teams are having to push back that we start getting issues. So if players are abiding by that and keep moving and leave that space there, then that cleans it up for everyone, really.
When the ball goes out of play and people are looking for a quick throw-in, if 2 players from the same team cross the touchline and the ball transfer between them, you can't throw it in quickly, can you?
No, so it's got to be that the first player who retrieves the ball that no one else has touched. So he can't throw it to a teammate or pass between the pair of them and then take the throw. So it must be that first player who retrieves the ball that's untouched. He's got the option, but any other player doesn't.
Saw that confusion and rain at the weekend. Let's talk about the tip tackle, because it has come up a few times, and it's a very marginal call sometimes, but it can be quite a harsh penalty if you get it wrong.
Yeah, and ultimately it's the tackler's obligation to bring that player down safely. So what we talk about, if the player goes beyond horizontal, it's got to be at least a penalty, and then from there, with some of those real bad tip tackles, your mindset is starting at a red card and working backwards. So if the player is basically taken up beyond horizontal and he's sort of dumped or dropped to the ground, then you're looking more at the higher end of the scale. If the player is just taken through above the horizontal and the tackler effectively brings him back down to ground safely, then it may be just a penalty. But it comes back to that safety issue as well. And if they take them up through horizontal and it's just more careless rather than reckless, the way they bring them down is possibly the difference between a red and a yellow in a lot of cases. So if they take them up and they almost get up there and think, what do I do now, and kind of just drop the player down without a lot of intent, then probably going to get yellowed. But it is, it's a judgment call at the time, and often there's a bit of that, you sort of just get that real wow factor with some of those real bad tackles at the end of it, and it's like you just sort of know it's at that top end around the red card side of things, and particularly if they take them up and drive them down, then there's not really a lot to think about there. But it is an area of concern around player safety.
Let's talk about striking, punching, call it what you like. We've had, in this last weekend, we've had Hayden Triggs reported as punching in the face and get a red card and then 1 week suspension, and Kane Hames is another one where he struck, not been sanctioned on the day, and got 5 weeks. So obviously it depends on what punishment you received at the time.
Yeah, and I think that would be one of the considerations without knowing the exact details of what happened in the judicial hearings, but there can be consideration made if the player has already been red carded versus an incident that hasn't been dealt with on field. So there can be a wee bit of a difference there. But I think ultimately, if the players are going to make these acts on field, with the amount of cameras and things, particularly at Super Rugby level, then they know they will be held to account to a certain degree. We're never going to get it completely out of the game, but hopefully it can minimise that sort of activity anyway.
And there's a variation. I mean, a halfback, perhaps closest to home, use the open hand slap a few times to free up the ball, let's call it that, and that goes unmissed, but and that's different, I suppose, from a forearm or a punch, but I suppose you really just shouldn't hit anyone at all. Yeah,
and I guess, in some of those situations where they're happening out in the open, you can obviously see that a lot clearer when there's a replay and things that, even if play's moved away across the other side of the field, there's generally a camera angle will catch a lot of things. So, there's not really a place for that in the game, so it needs to be stamped on.
Well, let's talk about the transition from Super Rugby and what we've talked about specific to Super Football, and what community rugby clubs are going to expect. Are they the same laws or interpretations thereof?
Yeah, so, I mean, the law book doesn't really change a lot. We do have some domestic safety variations for under 19s and below that impacts on some level of our local rugby, but basically our senior rugby, it's the same laws. We are looking through at likes of the priorities that we've got with Super Rugby. Clearly that you're dealing with the skill level of players and referees and coaches at a lower level. It's got to be something that can be adapted right through from under 14s to our Premier stuff. And we're looking at, from a community rugby perspective, having a similar set of priorities that are just tempered to suit the local audience. And things like space, well, that's a no-brainer. That should be the same regardless of the level of the game, but the expectations on some of the more technical aspects won't be there in the lower grades of the game. So we've also got to cater that some of the referees developing at the early grades as well won't be able to apply those laws quite as well as some of our more senior referees. So we've got to be mindful of getting the balance right there as well.